Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Fish Friday number 161. We have a good one for you today. Today's fish is one of those fish that you always see in videos and pictures, but a lot of people don't actually know about this fish. Today's fish that we're going to be talking about is BAM, the Atlantic Goliath grouper. Now the Atlantic Goliath grouper, or scientific name Epinephelus itajara. Again, that's Epinephelus itajara. It is part of the family Serenidae, which is a very large family. It's a family of sea bass and other groupers. So chances are you have seen these fish, or at least have seen them on TV or on commercials or even pictures of people catching these fish. Grouper is one of the group of fish that a lot of people go out to the ocean to fish for. They're really large. I don't think they fight too much, but they are really hard, really heavy, and it's always nice to catch a really big fish. Now, in terms of the Atlantic Goliath grouper, you're really going to find these in the western Atlantic, from northeastern Florida, south to Brazil, all throughout the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. You can actually find these along the eastern coast of Africa as well. And apparently there are some on the western edge along the Gulf of Mexico. I don't know if I really believe that, but it is part of their range map, so can't really dispute it. I do believe in the future that this grouper might be split into multiple species because of the difference in the range maps. But we're not there yet, so we're just talking about the Atlantic Goliath grouper. Now, I said that it's found throughout the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. Now, how deep is this fish? A lot of people assume that this fish is found in very deep waters, and you're kind of correct. However, throughout various parts of its life stages, and even before that, you can find this fish anywhere from 1 to 100 meters, which is going to be around 3 to 330 feet. So you can find them pretty much at everywhere, and even the larger ones don't necessarily hang out at the very bottom at 300 feet. Sometimes you'll find these at 30, 40 feet. It's really dependent on the habitat. That's where this fish likes to be. This fish likes to be in these rocky reefs. Primarily, that would be its natural habitat, but they're very heavily associated with artificial habitats as well. Fake reefs, wrecks, shipwrecks, oil platforms. In fact, a lot of times people will go fish around oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico to catch this fish, which tells you how commonly they are associated with those artificial anthropogenic habitats. Juveniles, however, they're very specific. Well, I wouldn't say very specific, but they're heavily associated with mangrove environments. So the mangrove forest and swamps up in the bays and estuaries of the Gulf, that'd be where you would find the juvenile portions of these fish. So that's kind of where you're there. They stay in those mangroves for about 5 to 6 years, and that's when they start moving to deeper habitats. Now, this is a really large fish. This is really, really big fish. They can grow up to 2.5 meters, which is 8.2 feet, but they can weigh up to 363 kilograms, which is around 800 pounds. These things are monstrous. After kind of like the largemouth bass, after a certain point, they no longer get much longer. They just start getting wider and heavier. So a 400 pound Goliath grouper is probably going to be not too much shorter than something like a 700 pound grouper. But they just get wider and larger around the middle. Now, this fish does have a pretty elongated body, as you can tell from this picture. This broad, flat head, small eyes. We say small eyes, but are they actually small eyes? Or is it just because the fish is so large? Well, they actually kind of do have small eyes. And also, as you can see, they're pretty variable in color. Brown, yellowish, greenish, olive. But they almost always have these black spots throughout the entirety of their body and on their fins. So pretty variable, but you can see the black spots here and the speckles here. Really mottled coloration. You can also see here These fish have a lot of teeth, but they're really small teeth. I wouldn't say small, but 3 to 4 rows of real fine pointy teeth, but no canines, no like really large teeth like you see on northern pike or muskellunge or anything like that, or especially the wolffish. Small scales, these are ctenoid scales, so just a large fish with small eyes, small scales. You're gonna have a hard time confusing a grouper with any other fish group. However, telling the difference between the species of grouper can be really problematic, especially if you're trying to deal with them in aquariums or in the aquarium trade, because so many color variations have been bred. Not saying you should have groupers in your aquarium. I, in fact, say the exact opposite. So, now back on the teeth. The grouper is an ambush predator. This thing is not necessarily incredibly aggressive, but it knows how big it is. So it's either sitting in wait or it'll snap things up as they go by. It eats fairly large fish, but it's primarily going after, like your crabs, your lobsters, and things like that, your invertebrates, even small sharks. Essentially, can it fit in its mouth? Yes. Will it eat it? Yes. So it could actually pose a small threat to humans. I wouldn't say that, a 700-pounder is going to swallow a person whole, but chances are they could actually check a person out and cause some damage, even if they're just kind of behaving or checking a person out. Kind of like shark attacks are predominantly just test bites. They're not actual hunting. So I kind of feel that the grouper would be very similar. So if you are diving around these, I personally wouldn't be too worried. But just be aware that they can if they decide to do something to you, they're probably going to do some damage. And they do defend their territory. So if you are diving with these, apparently they have an aggressive body language. They're probably flaring their fins. I couldn't really find any pictures or designations stating like what their aggressive body language is, but I'm imagining like other fish, especially bass and predators, they're flaring their fins out and doing normal sort of fish things. But apparently they will use their swim bladder to make a rumbling sound, so they're probably vibrating the muscles around the swim bladder, which is probably causing a really low growl. For some reason in my mind, I picture it as if you would hear a bear growl. Big, deep brrr. So be aware if you hear that and you're swimming next to one trying to take pictures, it's probably not happy with you. Now, when people think of fish, they often think of them as being extremely long-lived. And I'm not saying that this fish is short-lived, but it may not be as long-lived as people think. They really... most of the stuff I saw had them as living a max of somewhere between 37 and 40 years. And remember, they spent the first 6 years of their life up in the mangrove swamps while they were juveniles. So, people think of, tortoises and things like that living to 150, 200 years. This fish is, I think, a max of 40 years old. Not this particular fish, but this fish species lives to a max of 40. A lot of people would kind of assume that they're much older than that, but everything I saw says it's not actually the case. And they do grow pretty slow. They average approximately 4 inches, which is around 10 centimeters per year, until 6 years old. And then it goes down to about 1.2 inches, which is about 3 centimeters per year at age 15. And then when they're over 25 years old, they're only growing about a centimeter or 0.4 inches per year. So they start out growing fast like most fish, and then it just steadily declines. And that's not necessarily uncommon, but that's still pretty slow of a growth rate when you think about it. Now, in terms of spawning, they do have small spawning aggregations. Apparently about 100 individuals will gather together and have a communal spawning period. Now, I also have to think, when I did my notes for this video, was like, yes, that's a small spawning aggregation when you're comparing it to like minnows and stuff that have thousands of minnows gather in the same area and they spawn willy-nilly, but you have to think, you gather 100 individual Goliath groupers that are all around 300 to 500 pounds, are probably still taking up quite a bit of room. So maybe in terms of area, they are still taking up about the same amount of area. Just something to think about. But they are highly susceptible to rapid population decline, though. They are a little bit overfished, and they do have, apparently when they do spawn, a lot of fishermen will gather around them. These fish are not very quick moving, like I've stated, so they're very susceptible to spear fishermen. They're kind of an easy target. I mean, when you have a thing that's as big as a person swimming slowly, it's probably an easy target for a spear fisherman. And so that kind of goes into the interesting fact we're going to end the video on, is this. I found it really interesting on this fish's population status and its designation. So it used to be classified as critically endangered in 2011. It's currently, to my knowledge, classified as vulnerable, meaning that at some point the scientists believe that the population either has rebounded or is not as in trouble as they thought. In 2016, an assessment model was done on the population, and it was determined that there was an absolute population reduction of 33% from 1950 to 2014, sorry. And a lot of that does have to do with overfishing. Like I said, these fish are very popular for anglers. You can see this guy. This guy is thrilled. I don't blame him. That looks like a really fun fish to catch. But when you have more people fishing for this fish, but not as many fish spawning, you're going to have that population reduction. Something that was interesting to note was that there was a complete moratorium on the fishing of Atlantic Goliath groupers in continental U.S. waters since 1990 and in the Caribbean since 1993. And that means all fishing must stop, which is probably what helped their populations actually rebound from 2011 to 2021, at least in terms of the overall population. And what really found interesting is, even though they are classified as vulnerable, there's still a super high demand for people to try and fish for this fish. So much so, and I'm not disagreeing with their thing, in October 2021, the Florida Fish and Wildlife did a proposal to allow the fishing of 200 juvenile Goliath grouper per year, including 50 from the Everglades National Park. And the recreational fishing would be permitted in all state waters except for a couple of coasts. And this proposal was approved in March of 2022, so just last year. And Florida planned on issuing, I don't know if they did, but they planned on issuing 200 permits per year through a lottery system, which comes into effect this year, spring of 2023. So it either happened or it didn't. But I really want you to think about that. And the reason why I'm very okay with this sort of situation, a lot of people might immediately jump to the conclusion, oh, this fish is still classified as vulnerable, we don't need to be fishing for this, and there is an argument for that. But you have to understand, when you have this 200 permits through a lottery system, people are buying to get those permits. They're basically, it's almost like a raffle, a lottery. I'm assuming that's how it is. And if it's done like other lottery / raffle systems that I've seen, I haven't looked into this system, but I'm hoping what it is. And I'm kind of talking about that sort of lottery or raffle system in general when you're talking about natural resources conservation. A lot of times when agencies do a raffle or a lottery system, that all the money generated from that lottery or that raffle actually goes straight into the conservation and the research of those species, which means that by allowing a small amount of the fish to be harvested, you can potentially have much greater impacts in conservation work and reef habitat making and better policing of the waters and things like that. So don't immediately jump to the conclusion that just because a animal is vulnerable or endangered and some hunting or fishing still allowed to happen, don't say that's immediately bad. There are other factors that could be going into that system that ultimately might help the species a lot more. Because you have to remember, a scientist is not necessarily concerned about an individual of the species. They are concerned about the species as a whole. What will help the species rebound as a whole? They're not necessarily concerned about Atlantic Goliath grouper M-001AB. They're like, is that fish, will harvesting that fish help preserve the species as a whole for future generations? But thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If I don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you do. I'd really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. Enjoy reading the comments. If you'd like to support the channel, please click the link down below. It is by no means expected, but very much appreciated. Regardless, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and peace.